Imagine this. You're standing in a room full of people who say they love you. They smile at you. They reach for you. They tell you that you are safe here. And yet something deep within you recoils. Not out of malice, not out of arrogance, but from a silence too familiar to explain. You feel the air tighten. Their affection starts to feel like obligation. Their closeness begins to feel like a trap. You scan their faces for something you'll never admit you're looking for. A reason to leave. You will find one. You always do. Not because you don't want love, but because love comes with conditions. And somewhere along the line you decided that your freedom was not negotiable. Smart people don't avoid relationships because they're cold or broken or selfish. They avoid relationships because they see too much. They see the subtle expectations behind every kind word. They hear the unspoken contracts in every promise. They sense how quickly I love you can become I own you. And if you're that kind of person, the kind who thinks deeply, who notices the cracks beneath the surface, you've probably wondered, why does everyone else seem to surrender so easily, while I keep my guard raised, even in the arms of someone who means well? Why does the idea of intimacy sometimes feel like emotional debt? Why does partnership feel like the slow erosion of your autonomy? Is it possible that intelligence, especially emotional intelligence, makes you more aware of relational danger? That wisdom makes you see love not as an escape, but as a mirror, magnifying all your hidden fractures? Could it be that the smarter you are, the lonelier you become? Not because no one wants you, but because your own mind becomes a fortress no one else can enter? This is the paradox no one talks about. The more clearly you see others, the harder it becomes to let them get closer. And the more you understand yourself, the more dangerous connection begins to feel. But is this caution clarity? Or is it fear wearing the mask of insight? At what point does discernment become defense? When does self-awareness become self-isolation? And here's the most uncomfortable question of all. What if the very mind that made you wise is the same mind that's quietly making sure you end up alone? Let's go deeper, not just into the mind, but into the roots of this refusal, into the pain that shaped it, and the philosophy that justifies it. Are you ready to see what's underneath? It always starts earlier than we think. Smart people don't just decide to reject relationships, they learn to. Slowly, quietly, often without ever realizing it. It begins in childhood, where intelligence isn't just measured by grades but by perception. The smart child sees everything, the tension between their parents, the way affection is used as a tool, the way love disappears when they fail to meet expectations. They learn that relationships come with conditions, and those conditions come with consequences. So what do? They adapt. They become observers instead of participants. They start intellectualizing instead of feeling. And somewhere along the line, they build the most dangerous survival strategy of all. They learn to anticipate emotional pain before it happens. That anticipation becomes a worldview, a kind of emotional stoicism, not born from virtue but from vigilance. When someone says, "I care about you," they don't hear warmth, they hear a contract forming. When someone wants closeness, they don't feel connection. They feel pressure, expectation, performance, because deep down they were trained to equate intimacy with self-erasure. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of us we bury because they're too painful or inconvenient to face. And one of the most common shadows among highly intelligent, self-aware people is the fear of disappearing in someone else's needs. Relationships, especially romantic ones, threaten to crack open that buried part. The memory of being emotionally smothered, the resentment of being controlled, the pain of being seen only for what you could give, not who you were. So they retreat, not always physically, sometimes emotionally. They give just enough to keep the illusion alive, but never enough to risk full exposure. Because exposure means vulnerability, and vulnerability means powerlessness. Philosophically, it's easy to justify. Nietzsche wrote, "The surest way to corrupt a youth is to teach him to hold in higher regard those who think alike than those who think differently." Smart people often extend this into their emotional lives. They value freedom over attachment, individuality over compromise, power over dependence. They begin to equate love with conformity, with needing to become smaller to be accepted. And for the intelligent, freedom-loving soul, That is unbearable. So rather than risk losing themselves, they preemptively lose the connection. They sabotage it, or ghost it, or claim they're just not ready. But what they're really saying is, I don't know how to stay myself and still let you in. And yet, they crave connection. They long for intimacy. They want to be seen, but only in a way that doesn't cost them their autonomy. And that kind of love is rare, almost mythological, which leads to this paradox. They become deeply lonely people who are deeply afraid of being known. People who want closeness, but only if it doesn't challenge their defenses. People who can write essays on vulnerability, but shut down the moment they're truly asked to reveal themselves. And the worst part? They call it strength. They call it standards. They tell themselves they're just guarded, but more often than not, it's just fear in disguise. So what's the way out? What breaks this loop of brilliant isolation? That's what we'll explore in the next section, because the answer isn't found in giving up intelligence. It's found in redefining what strength really means and learning how to be powerful without needing to be distant. Let's start with a fact. Smart people don't reject relationships with fire. They do it with logic, with quiet, unshakable certainty. They don't scream, I don't need anyone. They whisper, I'll open up when I'm healed. I just need more time to work on myself. It's not the right person or the right moment, and the words sound intelligent, self-aware, mature, but often they're masks, elegant excuses to avoid emotional risk. One of the first traps is the myth of readiness, the belief that one day you'll be so complete, so emotionally regulated, so healed, that love will no longer feel threatening. But that day never comes, because love at its core is threatening. It shakes your identity, it disrupts control, it challenges the self-image you've spent years protecting. As Gabor Maté explains, trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. Smart people carry inner trauma in elegant packages: perfectionism, hyper-independence, obsessive introspection. They confuse solitude with healing, but healing doesn't happen in isolation. Healing is tested in relationship. Another trap is intellectualizing emotions. They know every psychological term. They can explain their triggers, their childhood dynamics, their attachment style. But they don't feel any of it. They've mastered the language of healing, but skipped the experience of healing. So when love comes close, they analyze it instead of surrendering to it. They dissect affection like a philosopher studies a flame, without ever getting burned. But connection isn't a concept. It's not a thesis. It's a risk. It's an irrational, messy, inconvenient thing, and it terrifies the mind that's used to control. Then comes the pedestal problem. The smarter you are, the harder it is to be impressed. You see through charm, you sense manipulation, you detect weakness and inconsistency. So you wait for someone who doesn't trigger your alarm bells, someone perfectly emotionally available, self-aware, growth-oriented, and trauma-informed. In other words, someone who doesn't exist. You demand emotional perfection from others because secretly you fear how your imperfection would be exposed in a real relationship. And so you stay alone. Not because no one is enough, but because no one feels safe enough. You even convince yourself it's noble. You say things like, I'm protecting others from my dysfunction. I don't want to be a burden. But here's the truth. You're not protecting others. You're protecting yourself from the pain of being seen and not being loved anyway. So you keep finding reasons to stay single, or you find partners you can't fully connect with, or you become the therapist in every relationship so that no one ever asks how you feel. Because as long as you're the strong one, the smart one, the emotionally stable one, you don't have to be vulnerable. But here's what no one tells you. Intimacy isn't found in strength. It's built in mutual weakness. In the moments where neither of you has the answer. In the nights when your voice cracks. In the chaos you don't try to explain away. That's where real connection lives. So what happens when you stop using intelligence as armor? When you put down the philosophy books long enough to feel the ache of being human? What happens when you let yourself be known, not just understood? That's the turning point. That's the work. In the next section, we explore that leap, the path back to connection for the mind that sees too much. How smart people can unlearn their emotional isolation without sacrificing their depth or their independence, and maybe how to stop mistaking self-protection for wisdom. So how do you love without shrinking? How do you open the gates without surrendering the city? This is where smart people get stuck. Because love, real love, feels like a loss of control. And for those who built their survival around control, around seeing every angle, anticipating every outcome, the idea of surrender sounds like death. But here's the truth. You don't lose yourself by loving. You lose yourself by hiding. The first step isn't falling in love, it's learning to stay present when love gets close. To notice the part of you that wants to run and not shame it, just observe it. Because that's not your wisdom speaking. That's your fear rehearsing an old survival script. When someone reaches for you and your instinct is to analyze or pull away, pause, breathe. Don't perform, don't explain. Just let them be near you without turning it into a problem to solve. Sometimes love is just about staying. Carl Jung believed that true growth begins when the shadow is integrated, when we don't exile the fearful parts but sit with them. That includes the part of you that fears dependence, the part that was told closeness meant control, the part that learned to equate love with suffocation. You don't defeat that fear by rationalizing it. You heal it through experience, through a new kind of relationship, one where you don't lose yourself just because you let someone in. And this is crucial. You don't need to choose between freedom and connection. You only need to stop defining freedom as distance. Love doesn't mean enmeshment. Intimacy doesn't mean codependency. Healthy love says you are still you even here with me. And in that space, you don't have to perform, you don't have to have all the answers, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to be honest, especially with yourself. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That space is where relationships are built, not in the instincts you've rehearsed, but in the moment you choose differently. Instead of ghosting, replying, instead of analyzing, feeling, instead of leaving, staying just long enough to witness what's real. It won't be perfect. You will overthink, you will doubt, you will want to disappear. But if you're willing to stop interpreting every vulnerability as a threat, you might realize something radical. The right relationship won't cost you your freedom. It will help you remember who you were before fear took over. You are not too complex to be loved. You are not too observant to be surprised, and you are not too smart to be held. But you must stop using your depth as a reason to stay alone. Because wisdom isn't isolation. Wisdom is knowing when to let someone help you carry your depth. So this is your turning point. Let go of the belief that being misunderstood is inevitable. Let go of the story that says all connection ends in loss. Let go of the pride in doing it all alone. You've protected yourself long enough. Now try something harder. Let yourself be loved without needing to disappear. In the final section, we'll offer a quiet challenge. A truth that's difficult to accept, but necessary if you ever want to love without fear. Because the question was never, are you lovable? It's, are you brave enough to stay when it's real? What it really means to be seen and still stay? Here's the truth. We all want to be seen, but we're terrified of what someone might find when they really look. So we curate. We perform, we shrink, we disappear the moment our mask slips. And the smarter you are, the more elaborate the disguise becomes, because the deeper your mind, the easier it is to hide in it. But no matter how well you speak, how clear your insights are, how precise your emotional vocabulary is, none of it matters if no one knows how you feel when you're hurting. Being seen isn't about being understood. It's not about someone admiring your brilliance, your depth, or your self-awareness. It's about this. Can someone see the parts you don't even want to admit exist and still stay? Can they witness your overthinking, your anxiety, your coldness when you're scared and not flinch? And more importantly, can you stay when that happens? Can you let yourself be fully known without collapsing into shame or pushing them away? Here's the quiet truth. Love isn't about finding someone who understands you. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to be misunderstood to feel safe. Because for many smart, self-protective people, being misunderstood is a shield. It gives you distance, it gives you control, it gives you a reason to stay untouchable. But it also keeps you alone, and maybe it's time to surrender that armor. Not to everyone, not recklessly, but to someone real, someone earned. You don't have to become small to be loved. You don't have to dumb yourself down. You don't have to pretend you don't feel everything. But you do have to stop running, stop ghosting, stop pretending solitude is strength when it's really just fear dressed up as clarity. The real work isn't about being ready, it's about being willing to be known, to be loved where you're still healing, to stop waiting for perfection before you let someone touch your soul. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you cannot fully become yourself in the echo chamber of your own thoughts. You need mirrors. You need friction. You need someone brave enough to stay when you're unraveling. But first, you need to be that person for yourself. You need to stay with you when the fear rises, when the doubt screams, when your mind says leave before they see too much. Stay. Because here's the truth. The love that's worth it won't ask you to trade your mind for your heart. It will ask you to bring both. And that kind of love, it starts when you decide to stop leaving yourself. Let that be your first small rebellion, your quiet revolution, your beginning. It honors me deeply for taking bold steps in forging resilient mind. You are not average anymore. And remember that one video is not enough to climb yourself to another level. Stay consistent.